to meet you. It's so nice to have you here in the store. Welcome, and thank you all for coming out on this lovely, humid afternoon. We are very thrilled to have Mitali Perkins back with us once again. I do think of her a little bit of as ours because she's been in Newton for so long and spent so much time at the bookstore, and so it's a pleasure to get to. This is the 15th time, is that right?
Wow.
My 15th
Wow.
book launch. I know. Pretty incredible. Yeah. Thank you, Mitali.
Mary was 7 when I started.
Well, Mitali Perkins has written many books for young readers. I can't list them all. She's been nominated for a National Book Award, honored as a most engaging author by independent booksellers, selected as a literary light for children by the Associates of the Boston Public Library, and was invited to serve as a judge for the National Book Award and the Kirkus Prize. Mitali's latest book, Hope in the Valley, is what she's here for today, and I'm so thrilled to have her. It has been busy collecting praise from all corners, starred reviews from Kirkus, Publishers Weekly, Horn Books, School Library Journal, and Book Page. In their starred review, Kirkus Reviews writes, "Grief, memories, and the difficulty of letting go permeate this powerful story about family, friendship, and finding your voice. Deeply compelling, a riveting, courage-filled story." And we are extra lucky to have Mitali here today, this afternoon, in conversation with editor emeritus Roger Sutton, who served as editor-in-chief of the Horn Book from 1996 to 2021. He was previously editor of the Bulletin of the Center for Children's Books and a children's and young adult librarian. After they talk, I'm sure they will take some questions, and then we will have Mitali sign books up front. If you could, did I say to turn cell phones off? That would be silence cell phones, and give me a really wonderful welcome for Mitali and Roger Sutton.
Yeah, the 5th. It's a picture book, Christmas picture book, and Mary somehow miraculously has copies here, so to sign. So yeah, so that's another.
Hey, I haven't seen this
You haven't
one
seen
yet.
that one yet? Okay, I got you diverted from the start.
Ah,
Hi, Roger.
how are you?
Good, I'm good. Nice to see you.
How did we meet?
How did Roger and I meet? Okay, I don't, way back.
Because I want to say Cape Cod, but
Yes,
It was
Cape
Cape
Cod.
Cod?
When we were looking for good ice cream, because New England ice cream is the best. So we went on a hunt for New
yes,
England ice
we
cream.
were both at a writers' conference
Okay, good.
near Hyannis on
Mhm.
Cape Cod, and heard about Four Seas ice cream. Do you all know that place? Oh, it's the best. And so we went there 2 or 3 times
Yeah,
a day.
that was that was back when we could eat like that. Now we can't eat like that. Yeah.
So it's been a while. That
It
was the
has
last
been.
century.
And I remember various banquets we sat in together and all kinds of good memories.
So, but
Yes.
now we're here to talk about your new novel,
That's
Hope
right.
in the Valley, which begins on the cusp of, and you're going to tell me how to pronounce your heroine's name.
Pandita.
Pandita. I didn't know if it was Pandita, Pandita. Okay. On the cusp of her 13th birthday.
Yes.
Growing up in a rapidly changing Silicon Valley, where were you when you turned 13?
Yes, I was also in the Bay Area, and I had 2 sisters like Pandita in the book, and they were bossy, just like Pandita's sisters are in the book. And we had just moved to California with my immigrant family. I was born in India, and we came from New York to California, and we were in this pretty much all suburban, sort of born in the USA neighborhood. But my parents were pretty fresh off the boat, just a lot of. So I was navigating that at 13, the idea that at home we were a Bengali village. You take your shoes off, your dad's word is the law. There's no eye rolling at home. And if any of you came of age with me at school, I was trying to figure out California lifestyle, so I was curling my hair back like this, you know, like in those days, because it was like Charlie's Angels days back then. And I was trying to look like Farrah Fawcett, which I thought I could become like that, but somehow it didn't work. That's what I was doing at 13. Was
Do
navigating.
you remember your birthday?
My birth date?
Yeah. Do you know your birthday?
My birthday at 13.
Your 13th birthday.
I was so new. Yeah, it was a sad birthday because I had no friends. I was at this middle school, and everyone thought I was from another planet. And I wandered around, but I have to tell you, I had 4 years in New York City before that, and every week in New York City, my sister took me to the Flushing Public Library, and we brought home 7 books. and I used to climb out to the fire escape in our little apartment in New York.
I remember you wrote about this for the Horn Book.
That's right, I
Yeah.
did. And I would eat sweet tart candies. Very bad vice, reading and eating candy. Anyone else like to read and eat at the same time? Yeah, okay, it's such deep pleasure to combine two of your pleasures like that. And I would read and read and read. So by the time I got to that age, I had read 7 books a year. Some of them were good, some of them were terrible. Some of them I finished, some of them I didn't. But I had equipped myself with maybe like 1,400 stories, 1,400 heroes' journeys, you know. Once upon a time, there was Peter. Once upon a time, there was Jen, you know, all those heroes' journeys. So when I got to that school and I was facing no friends, I really pretty much held my head up pretty high. Looking back, I think, wow, I navigated that with a lot of strength because I had, you know, my Emily of Deep Valley tucked away and all my beautiful stories. And so I ran for class office the next year. I was like, well, if you don't want it, your loss, not to talk to me about it. I don't know, I had a lot of confidence. I think it was because of the stories.
I like what you just said about some stories, some were great, some were not great, some you finished, some you didn't. I mean, I think sometimes people, particularly people who don't read, particularly parents who don't read, get a little anxious around reading. That it has to be a certain kind of book, or if you start a book, you have to finish it. And a book is better than a graphic novel. So, you know, there's rules,
That's right.
but readers don't have rules.
That's right.
And I like that you say you didn't observe the rules either.
No, and you wrote a book, a wonderful book called The Circle of Readers, right? Is that
Family Readers.
Family Readers. And the thesis that I loved in your book was that children who are feral readers, like wild readers, that we have to
Best kind.
trust the child reader because a story is such a mystery. Every child has to find a story and it intersects in such a mysterious way. So I read Fearly. There's no adult saying, in fact, I was scared. Sorry, librarian friends. Can you raise your hand if you're a librarian, please? Okay, so I have such good librarian friends. Librarian friends, I was terrified of you. I didn't want to come to you and say, Miss Barb, what should I read? I didn't.
Why?
I know. I just wandered around the stacks and got the books that I wanted, and I was, like I said, I'm a really, after reading your book, which really, this is one of the theses of your book, I've been really convinced that a free child reader creates the defenses that a child needs from any kind of didactic agenda that an adult might have. And so I think it's a really wonderful thing to be able to pick the books you want and find the books you love because some of them may be different. Like you and your brother are going to love different books because you're such different people, right?
Or two people can love the same book for completely different reasons.
Yeah, exactly. It's such a mystery, isn't it? Your story, that story, intersecting your hero's journey, that hero's journey, and it's just this mysterious connection that's so personal and intimate. Yeah.
So we do see an intersection between your own story and Pandita's story in this book. But how do you, knowing you for 20 years or something, I can see ways how you and Pandita are alike. And you just talked about some, the love of reading and reading as a source of strength and the sisters. How is she different?
Pandita was, she was born in the States, so her family's one a little bit removed. She's other than that, I did not want to grow up. I don't know if any of you were like me, but growing up seemed scary. My sisters were growing up, and like boys were coming after them, and my dad was like, no boys, and they were like boys, and my dad was no boys, and that looked really confusing to me. And it just seemed hard to go through to become a woman. Seemed really challenging, and I didn't want to grow up, and it was scary. And that's why I reread a lot of my favorite books. I just wanted to stay in childhood, and so that's similar. Also, I wrote poetry, a lot of poetry when I was 12, and one of my favorite things about this book is that I got to find my poems that I wrote, and I got to put them in the book. This is a book
those are your
those are my
poems?
poems that I wrote when I was 12. I know, and I get to co-write the book with 12-year-olds. Are there any 12-year-olds in the room? Can you raise your hand if you're 11 to 13? Okay, well, if you write at all, think about that later on, like 100 years later, when you're this age, to kind of co-write it with myself and put those poems in there and honor the writer that I was, that I loved so much. Writing gave me so much joy. It still does. It's still one of my favorite ways to manage this narrow path of life is by writing and using words. So that's in there. That's similar. I was scared to talk in front of people. She was scared to talk in front of people. I was confident, but I didn't like going up in front of a crowd. So she faces that. in the book. So it's a lot more similar.
How do you allow a character, how does a character break away from the author?
That's a really good question. Yeah, so the character definitely does. There's a mystery in that creativity as well, because yeah, she starts based on me. Maybe all my characters are like me, if they're boys, if they're Burmese boys, or whatever. They're all basically at the core struggling with something I'm struggling with, the courage. This is about the courage to move on when you have to let go. You cannot stop becoming 13 when you're 12, and you cannot go back to the way things were. That's just the way human beings are. There's no way to stop time. I wish there were, but there's not. And that's about that challenge we have as human beings, to be able to say, all right, whether or not I like it, life is moving me forward, and I've got to either, resist that or face my whatever is in the new time. And the town is going through that past, present, and future. And I felt like, our country's kind of going through that. What do you keep from the past that doesn't prevent you from flourishing in the future? That's kind of the question she's wrestling with in the book. And I forgot the question because I'm rambling on now.
How do you set a character free from yourself?
Well, right. So that theme was in there, but then these, what happens is I see a story as a weave of three things. So there's a person who's similar to me in the beginning with something that's a connection, but then there's a place, and the story comes out of a place. So this is Silicon Valley in the 1980s, and I know that place, but there she is, her home is there, and I didn't grow up there. So she starts so different from me in that. Mm-hmm. I grew up in the East Bay, which is different. It wasn't a tech center. And then there's the idea of a plot. So I didn't have an abandoned orchard across the street that I used to go to with my mom, who's no longer on earth, and write my poems. She does. So the plot takes her away, and she starts to make choices that I didn't make, and she moves out of a place that she's deeply loves that I didn't. So in those two ways with people, the person might start out where I am, but then as I work on weaving in place and plot, it will divert, because there'll be choices that she makes that I could never have made, or things that she'll do that I'll never get to. Sometimes she does things I'm like, why are you doing that, Pandita? What's wrong with you? Mitali wouldn't have done that. And then it goes from there. Yeah.
So how much do you know then when you start out? Like, I know writers who, are really methodical,
Yeah.
and they know who their character is, they know what their character's going to do, and they know how the book is going to end. Where were you when you started this?
Okay, so when it comes to people, place, and plot, I'm good at people. I can look at your faces, and I'm older now, and one of the best things about growing older, as Madeline L'Engle says, is that you come with all the ages you were before. So this is one of the things I love about getting older, is that you can see things so much more deeply. So when I look at your faces, I can see things that I couldn't see when I was, let's just go back to 30, 40, 50. I can see things that I can not see before. So people are easy peasy for me. I love characters. Place is great. I love a 5 senses place. I love Newton in August with my husband and I have been talking about that leafy feeling of that humid air. I love 5 senses place. Plot, Roger, is my nemesis. Because in my earlier versions or my earlier books, wonderful people sat around in a beautiful place and drank a lot of tea, they just talked a lot, and nothing much happened to them. That's kind of my jam. So to have actually
That's adult books, Mitali.
Yeah, children, no, right. So I've been working on plot, and I'm using screenwriting books to work on structure. And so for this one, I used a book called Save the Cat Writes a Novel, in which she outlines. Save the Cat comes from the screenwriting phenomenon called where you've got to care about the character enough, so you've got to have her save a cat in the first scene, so that you root for her, right? So but in that book she offers structure. She offers things like, what's the call to adventure scene? What's the midpoint scene? Usually when you open a book that you love, if you open it in the middle, it's a pivotal scene. There's going to be something that happens right in the middle of the story. And then there's that all is lost scene. And then there's the finale kind of scene where it comes back to the beginning. And so I'm actually teaching a course this coming fall, tomorrow, start tomorrow. Tomorrow's my first day. I'm teaching a course, and I'm going to have my students, 18 students, college students, they're going to write those 4 scenes for a novel they haven't even dreamed up yet. And that's what I did for this. I wrote those scenes, and that gave me some structure, because I kind of knew what was going to happen in the darkest moment, all is lost scene, the midpoint scene, the call to adventure scene, and that really helped, because then I mean, when Kirkus said this was riveting, and my friend here just told me that he started reading the book yesterday and he read it all the way through and stayed up because he couldn't finish it. And I'm like totally thrilled because that means I nailed it, Roger. And yeah, that's how it is.
So when did you decide she was going to be living across the street from this beautiful falling down old house?
Yeah, this beautiful falling down on old house with apricots, trees, and the quiet birds, and she and her mom. When did I decide? That's a good question. So I did a lot of historical research for this book because I did live through that time period in Silicon Valley, but who remembers anything now, you know? So I was trying to figure out how it was on the cusp of that big technological boom. You know, it hadn't been, we got our first Apple computer in 1984, right? I mean, it hadn't yet become, it was all these beautiful orchards all over Silicon Valley. In fact, it was called, not Silicon Valley, it was called the Valley of Heart's Desire because there were so many orchards and it was all in bloom. People would come from trains and all over the whole country as a destination. There was a blossom festival with a blossom queen. And for me, that was so interesting to discover that place that is now known for apps and tech and now AI and ChatGPT and all that stuff was renowned for. And there were immigrants from all over who came to work in those orchards. And so I delved into the history of that. And I think the idea of an orchard that was being torn down, a place like that's so fruitful and beautiful for her, it just felt like the right place to start the story. And it really actually starts in a porch swing. And there's something about porch swings, like when you sit down next to somebody in a porch swing, just your heart rate kind of slows down. And if you share poems with them and stories with them in that porch swing in a quiet orchard, that's what she and her mom used to do. And to me when you get to the end of the book, didn't I end it there too on a porch swing? Do you remember that?
Don't give away the ending.
Yeah, so it ended on a porch swing too, right? That last scene. So I did try to.
And that's something really terrific that you do at the beginning is she has this memory of sitting on the swing with her mother and grieving her mother. I can give that away because her mother
kind of all over the place.
is gone before
4 years.
the story begins. But she would write, and she had treasures and letters that her mother, and a photograph of her mother that she kept in this swing as a safe place.
Yes.
And then boom, here come the developers.
Right, here comes
that house is coming down.
Yeah.
And a fence goes up, you can't go. What's going to happen to that stuff? It's such a nice little classic moment of suspense that's propelled almost until the last page of the book.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. And it was such a metaphor for me for the safety of childhood. When there's a fence around it, you can no longer go back to that safe, beautiful place, and you have to move out into the world, and you have to find your way. But that door is closed now. She's 12 going on 13, and that was when it starts to feel like I was just at a bat mitzvah, and that's that age where, Jewish people have that rite of passage because it's a pivotal age, so. Yeah, thanks for noticing that. That was the picture that I describe of her mother. I think I'll be able to read a little excerpt to you. Is a picture that my cousin sent me of my mother with her 2 long braids when she was wearing this sari, and she just looked so. It was in the village where my mom grew up, and so that was a picture that I treasure. Is a picture I have myself of my mom. So.
I'm going to jump off your bat mitzvah remark to. Mitali and I are both pretty churchy, although
we're
different
churchy.
denominations. And I'm in the choir at my church, and we were done this morning, and I was thinking about the questions I was going to ask her, and I thought, I've got a great question about religion. But I wonder
He's
if
going
Mitali,
to go there, everybody.
if Mitali will want to answer it. So I sent her a text message that she hasn't picked up yet.
Oh yeah,
I gave her a preview, so it's okay.
Yes, please
Which
ask
is,
anything.
Why don't the characters in your book go to church?
Why don't the characters in my book go to church? Okay, so when I first met Roger, you were kind of a little not churchy back then.
True.
And it's been so amazing to watch Roger become churchy. Have you ever watched that show, Kim's Convenience?
Yeah.
Okay, so you know how the mother in that show talks about Jesus, and she calls him the Jesus. So that's how Roger and I talk about Jesus. We're like, and so today he texted me. He said, he said, getting in the spirit. He sent me a picture of his church, and I said, the Jesus will be with us, and that's what we talk about. So I did not grow up in church at all. I had zilcho. I didn't speak church. I didn't know I was 19 years old before I entered the door of a church, and so in a way though, when I think about my childhood and all the books I read and the people who love me, and even those librarians, there's a librarian character in this book who's not scary, who's very loving and welcoming and very delightful. There were people who welcomed us as a family into this country, and it was a sort of a preface to the love I would find in the Jesus, right? It was those people who gave me the hospitality, who opened their hearts and homes to us as a family. There were people who showed me the love of the Jesus before my family ever knew anything about that. So, and the books, the books I read, they were so full of that love that I was so craving and longing for, and I eventually found in church. So it's kind of a preface to. I can see
You're
Pandita.
kind of avoiding my question.
Oh, okay, I can see Pandita. Her family did not go to church, like my family didn't go to church. But I can see her at age 19, like me, getting invited to go to a church, walking in and saying, "What the heck is a narthex? I have no idea." I can sort of see her following that same path that I eventually followed, because she's deeply loved, as I was deeply loved before church. There are ways that I think God works in all of our lives that have nothing to do with church, and loving us and drawing us, and that was hopefully in her life there. And hopefully you'll find glimpses of that as you read the book, of somebody loving her in a big way and drawing her back into a place of flourishing. That's what happened to me.
It's just something, excuse me, I noticed even before I was churchy.
Okay.
That although church is a big part
Yeah.
of many children's lives, they
Yeah.
go to church, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It doesn't show up in children's books, and I think it's because the subject makes publishers nervous.
That's right. Where's that other book? Absolutely, you're right. In fact, Roger published an excerpt of my book. Where'd that book go?
Steeped in stories.
Yeah, Steeped in Stories. I wrote a book about this, about virtues and stories, and how important it is to read. And there's many chapters in there. There's a chapter about race, culture, and power that he easily could have published. He wanted to excerpt it in the Horn book. I'm like, to stay safe, Roger. But there is a chapter where I talk about how important Jesus is to me, and Roger's like, let's publish that one in the Horn book. And I want to go Jesus-y with my exit song. And you went there, you published it. It's there forever now in print. The story of how I became a follower of Jesus is there because of Roger's courage in that. So yeah, there's not a lot. My Christian books, do have sort of like, hopefully all my books come out of my faith, but I have these outrightly, like the one that I'm selling now today is a Christmas story called Holy Night and Little Star. Surprisingly, the theme is about a little star who doesn't like to change and who doesn't want any. The same theme that is in Hope in the Valley, but it's very heavily, it's a nativity story, and it doesn't really get the reviews that the Hope in the Valley is getting. It doesn't. So yeah, you're right, absolutely right. That it's kind of a verboten subject, and I think because, and I think it's because there's this idea that we want to guard children's hearts, and there's from dangerous vehicle of books, right? And it goes on both sides. There's such a debate now about what books children should read, and so we've moved away from the classics. We're like pulling away the classics, but then now there are other people who want to pull away contemporary books, and in both cases there's this fear of what books can do to a child, because there's a sense that children are vulnerable. But if you let children have many, many, many stories, a child develops a resilience that maybe they'll read my Christmas story and say, heck no, that's fine by me.
Sure.
But they should be able to read it, right? And maybe they could read a book on Islam, and they'll be like, that sounds good, but I'm not sure. Like a lot of books, that's the beauty of this country. That's why I love the United States of America. And I get so frustrated that it's changing. That access to the freedom of lots of different stories. There's a great quote about libraries where a library should have a book that makes everybody. What is that quote?
Everybody should
Be offended. The library should have a book. Yeah.
Everyone should find a book that offends them.
Yeah,
in
a good library. Like in this bookstore, you should be able to find a book that you pick up and you say, "Oh my gosh!
How dare they?
How dare they publish that?" That's the beauty of it. Yeah.
You need that.
You need that. So yeah.
I have one last question.
Okay.
And tell me again the name of that book that I excerpted in the Horn book.
It's called Steeped in Stories.
Steeped in Stories, in which Mitali, it's not a churchy book. It's a lot of things.
It's a lot of things.
It's not a proselytizing kind of book, though, at all. But what she did there, really beautifully, was look at several of her childhood favorites.
That's right.
And, how they spoke to her now. And it was interesting to me to read this book, Hope in the Valley, in the context of knowing the kind of books you loved as a child. That although, this is certainly an eventful story, aside from the orchard across the street being torn down, there's her father starting to, maybe he's going to go out with this other woman. She's horrified. She's growing up. Her best friend isn't speaking to her.
Yeah,
there's a lot.
no best friend, yeah.
But at heart, it really is a friend and family story, which was exactly the heart of so many of the books that you loved, like the Lucy Maud Montgomery story.
And Three Gables, yeah.
It's like, here's a girl growing up, on the younger side of growing up, and dealing with the world that's sort of getting bigger around her.
That's right. Did somebody get that down? Because that's excellent. That's a great quote. Yeah, that's right. Thank you for seeing that. There is a connection to the books I loved and that sort of old-fashioned feeling of friends and family. Yeah.
How do you think being a reader made you a writer?
Let's see. Let me think about that.
Because I do see that connection.
Yeah, I think I was so deeply formed. I went to college. I thought I was going to get this career of, my goal was, when you're 20, you have these lofty goals. My goal was that at the end of my life, there should not be one hungry child left on the planet. I will single-handedly eradicate hunger. That was my goal, right? Why should there be, how can I, and then, that's a great goal. And then, but, at exams week would come up and I get stressed and I would disappear off campus to the Palo Alto Public Library and I would find, Anne of Green Gables and I would reread it. I just loved children's books. They had formed me deeply, and I knew. And then I started to realize where did my desire to help people come from? Where did that compassion come from? And it came right out of a book like A Little Princess, or these books that I loved. They were like, I describe them as spiritual aunties and uncles. I call C.S. Lewis Uncle Jack, and that's because they formed me, they shaped me. And so if I were really going to have an impact on the world, I wanted to, you sometimes find your contribution based on the way that you were given to, right? And so I thought, when you shape a child's heart, because children read differently than adults, when you shape a child's heart with these deep virtues and values, that is a powerful thing. And so I switched after my second book was rejected 22 times and came out 11 years after my first book. And I almost gave up on this vocation. I was doing it part-time. I was embarrassed to talk about it. When my second book came out, I thought, if I hung on that long, and I went on retreat, and I felt this deep conviction that this is what God wanted me to do, to serve the world, was to tell stories. And I just put my stake in the sand, and I said, I'm all in. And so, my 20th book is coming out now, so I'm glad I didn't give up. But yeah,
it's really been a pleasure, talking to you today, but in the years that we've known each other, to see sort of us growing in tandem. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's so true, Roger.
Yeah, we started out not so much, and then we kept at it and at it.
Ice cream cone after ice cream cone.
Exactly.
Roger has his husband here, and I have my husband here, so it's just so lovely that we both have our significant.
They stuck with us for all those years. All right, now you said you wanted to do a reading, and we also want to take questions.
Yeah,
what order do you want to do?
I don't know.
This
It's up
in?
to you.